Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 638. And today's date is April 9th, 2015. And the title of this episode is The U.S. Government is Preparing for the Economic Collapse and War. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, we understand that April 9th is today, and Greece had a huge payment that was due to the International Monetary Fund. They paid around 450 million euros. Even though they paid that amount, they still have more payments coming up. And the next big one is coming up around May 12th. And that's about 767 million euros. And we're going to have to see how they maneuver this one because they're in a cash crunch at this point in time. But we have to remember that Tsipras was meeting with Putin, and we see the finance minister Varoufakis. He was out there saying, listen, this entire situation, finger pointing is not going to help whatsoever. The Euro institutions are offering unsatisfactory solutions to our problems. And we can see right now, as Tsipras was with Putin, they made a couple of deals out there. I mean, Greece and Russia, they signed a trade deal that will bring Greece about 4.2 million euros. And they talked about the renewal of the natural gas deal. And this is going to be a huge benefit to Greece. We can see that the outcome of this meeting was firstly to secure the 2 billion euro financing of the project. And they were trying to get through all the obstacles, so the problem that they had with South Stream doesn't occur with Greece. And we have to remember this pipeline is going to come in, and it's going to go through Greece, it's going to go through Serbia, it's going to go up through Austria, and eventually into the European nations. And we can see this is going to help in many different aspects. The construction of the pipeline opens a substantial window of opportunity for Greece to become a regional natural gas transit hub. And there's so many things that this will allow the Greek government to have. It will increase their GDP. There'll be new jobs that are created. And we can see right now the Greek economy is expected to have significant benefit from the taxation and other revenues that will accrue from the operation of the works, while a number of conditions for the extension of natural gas networks and the consumer supply to new regions of Greece will be created. And we can see that all of this is going to spur economic growth. It will help Greece out. It will do actually the opposite of what the IMF was doing to Greece, putting them further and further and further into debt and having the government impose austerity on the people. This didn't spur economic growth. They did this since 2008. There was no growth whatsoever. And we can see right now they're on the right track. They're trying to bring in revenue. This is what countries need to do at this point in time. They don't need more debt. They need income, just like in your household. You don't want more debt. You want more income. It'd be a lot better if you were bringing in $1 million instead of $50,000. Life would be a little bit easier if that money was coming in. It's the same for countries. There is no difference. Now, out here in the United States, we see the initial claims, jobless claims, have come in. And we see after the abysmal March payroll numbers, there were expectations in the whisper forecast of today's initial claims that there would be a sizable jump in initial unemployment claims. But hey, there wasn't. And basically, why was this? Were they manipulating the numbers once again? Well, yes, they were, because curiously, when we break it down, guess what they left out of the numbers once again? All of the oil jobs that were lost. They don't include them. And we know in Texas there was a sizable jump of claims, but they were not included whatsoever. And they completely contradict Challenger layoffs report, according to which Texas is now based solely on the pace of terminations in recession. And when we look at the chart, we see, Texas laid off about 47,000 people. And of course, what is the government doing? They're completely manipulating all the numbers. They have left off about 100,000 oil jobs. They're not counting them. They're not even looking at them, to continue with the illusion that everything is perfectly fine. And we see right now that merchant sales for February dropped for the third month in a row in February, the longest stretch since the last recession. After January's downward revised plunge of 3.6%, against expectations of only a 0.5% downward trend, this was the biggest single monthly drop since March of 2009, during that great recession period when it was just hitting. Worst of all, the annual pace of decline has now stretched over both January and February, confirming that 2015 is now officially a year of contraction for the U.S. economy. And just to remind everyone, every time this series suffers an annual decline, there is a recession. And again, we have to remember that the U.S. economy is contracting. I know they want us to believe that we're in a recovery. Jobs are plentiful. There are millions of jobs that are open. They just can't find the right people to fill them. Really, with 93 million people out there, they can't find anyone to fill those jobs. And let me just tell you what companies do. They put out that they do have job openings. And I remember this going back to 2007 when I was working for a company. We had about 5 openings. But guess what? From upper management, you know what they told us? Keep those jobs open, but do not hire anyone. And we scratched our head and we said, well, why not? Well, we just don't have the budget at this time, but we don't want to close the job openings because then we will lose them. And this is what many companies do. We see that U.S. factory orders also confirmed a week ago that the U.S. is now in a recession when factory orders tumbled by 4.3%, their worst annual decline since Lehman. You know, Lehman that closed down. And we see that the Baltic Dry Index holding steady. It didn't decline, it didn't go up, but it is 3 times lower than it was last year. How in the world are we in a recovery? We are not whatsoever. And here are some signs that American families are being economically destroyed, and this is coming from out of the Economic Collapse blog. The poorest 40% of all Americans now spend more than 50% of their incomes just on food and housing, which we discussed before. For those Americans that don't own a home, 50% of them spend more than a third of their incomes just on rent. The price of school lunches has risen to $3 mark at many public schools across the nation. McDonald's, Dollar Menu, and more now has items that cost $5. The price of ground beef has doubled since 2009. Incomes fell for the bottom 80% of all income earners in the United States during the 12 months leading up to June 2014. At this point, more than 50% of all American workers bring home less than $30,000 a year. After adjusting for inflation, median household income has fallen by nearly $5,000 since 2007. 62% of Americans are currently living paycheck to paycheck. The rate of home ownership in the U.S. has been declining for 7 years in a row and is now the lowest it has been in 20 years. And this is why the real estate market is not improving whatsoever. It's actually getting worse. The people are tapped out. They don't have the money to sell the homes. And we can see right now when we look at all the different places around the country, a lot of people are saying, listen, I can't sell my home right now. Prices are coming down. Even though they're coming down, I don't have enough money to go out and purchase another house. And those youths who are coming out of college, they can't find those high-paying jobs to get a home. 80% of them are having a tough time finding work, and they are inundated with student loans they can't even pay off. This is the next generation. Where are we going from this point. We're going nowhere. And this is why the real estate market is completely collapsing at this point in time. The government is trying everything. The central banks, they're trying everything just to bring people in. But guess what? It is not working whatsoever. Now, we're going through the spring and summer seasons. This is the hot time period for real estate. We talked about this last year also when we went through the spring and summer, and guess what? We saw a little bump up, but guess what? It completely fell apart as we went into the fall. It didn't really do that well in the spring and summer, and I think this year it's going to be even worse. And we're going to see prices drop even further, especially when we come towards the end of the summer. And this is when things are really going to get scary, because we saw this back in 2007, 2008, where the housing prices, nobody knew what was going on. They kept on dropping. They kept on dropping. People thought the real estate market was still good, and everything just started to fall apart rapidly, and it accelerated, and we're going to see the same thing occur once again. You have to remember, they're still trying to bring anyone that has a heartbeat into the system through auto loans, student loan, mortgages, and they're just running out of people. We just don't have the money. We lost a lot of our wealth during 2008, and it was never regained at this time. But we can see all the governments, I should say the central banking system, they realize the governments will not bail them out, and this is why they're getting ready for a bail-in. And most of the countries already have the bail-in document. We see bank deposits in Austria will no longer enjoy state protection and a state guarantee in the event of bank runs and a bank collapse when legislation is enacted in July. The plan to ensure the state is no longer responsible for insuring deposits has been readied by the Australian government in conjunction with the EU. Now, the EU already has that document ready to go. Currently, Austrians have their bank deposits guaranteed to a value of about 100,000 euros, the first half to be provided by the failing bank and the other by the state. From July, however, the state will be removed from the process, and a special bank deposit insurance fund is to be set up and paid into by the banks to meet the potential shortfalls. And this amount is only going to be 1.5 billion euros. And it will be filled gradually over the next 10 years. So you know this is not going to cover anything. And we know that even if it was brought up to the 1.5 billion, it is completely inadequate to deal with a bank failure. What unfolds in Austria will likely follow across the EU. It may be that Austria was prompted to enact this legislation first among its European partners, precisely because it anticipates major bank failures in the wake of the failure of its own bad bank, Heta. So we can see right now that these countries are getting ready. They know what's coming. They realize the collapse is on the horizon, and it's getting closer and closer to that period. And this is why we see Europe, the United States, central banking system pushing more all around the world. We see Russia and China, they're continually making economic deals. They're making deals. The U.S. central bankers are making more. China will reportedly finance the so-called peace pipeline, natural gas pipeline from Iran, home to the world's second largest reserves, to energy-deprived Pakistan. The project was delayed due to U.S. dissent, and right now it looks like this is going forward, and we can see right now that China, Russia, working with Iran, getting ready for these sanctions to be dropped. If they are, we don't know at this time. Only the framework was agreed upon. The final decision will come before July 1st of this year. We see that Vietnam decided to join the Russian-led economic union. And we can see at this point, many countries are starting to pivot towards China, the AIIB bank, and towards Russia. And they're looking away from the United States and central bankers because they realize they need to protect themselves. They need to protect themselves from this major, major collapse. Russia now is looking at Indonesia. They looked at Thailand. And now both of these countries Russia would like to trade with them not using the dollar. They would like to use their national currency. So what they're doing at this point, Russia is continually making more and more deals with all these different countries saying, listen, let's bypass the dollar. Let's use our own currencies. China is doing the same thing, and this is accelerating. If you notice, as we continually report on this, we see more and more countries coming in and saying, we're not going to use the dollar. And as this continually happens, no one's going to need the dollar in the reserves anymore. And this dollar will flood back to the United States. Yes, we might see in certain parts of the industry, we might see deflation, but I believe what's happening is, just like a tidal wave, we see the rushing out of the water, which is deflation, and eventually, when everything comes crashing down, that wave hits, we will see massive inflation because the central banking system will completely lose control. And we understand the BRICS system, the AIIB bank, it's all to rival the private Western central banking system. They're competing against it, drawing countries in, and anyone else they could find. And this is continually happening. The creation of the BRICS reserve currency pool worth $100 billion will allow member states to depend less on a negative process in the world economy and bypass market volatility. Along with the launch of the new development bank, it is one of the most important initiatives for countries entering into this association. The agreement establishing a pool of reserve currency was signed last summer, and now they're ratifying it, they're pushing it forward. Many countries join the AIIB, and we can see Russia and China are making a major push. They're changing the system right in front of our eyes because they realize the dollar is collapsing. And what is the United States doing? Well, the United States government central bankers, they are getting ready for this collapse. This is why they've been nationalizing the police force, training them to come down hard on people, just like we saw that video of the person getting shot 8 times from a police officer, then trying to plant a stun gun, and they didn't realize they were being recorded. This is happening quite a bit across the country, where we see the police very aggressive at this point. And we can see that there are certain states now are saying, listen, we don't want our police forces to be militarized. And we can see that in Montana, there is a bill which is introduced by Representative Nicholas Schwarterer, hopefully I pronounced his name right, House Bill 330, bans state or local law enforcement agencies from receiving drones that are armored, weaponized, or both aircraft that are combat configured or combat coded, grenades or similar explosives, grenade launchers, silencers, militarized armored vehicles, from federal military surplus programs. New Jersey Governor Chris Christie signed a bill into law that pretty much does the same thing as Montana's bill. And we can see right now the Department of Homeland Security set this up. They're giving all these fabulous gifts and prizes to all the different police enforcement precincts. And we can see that they're continually giving them all of these weapons because they want them accountable to themselves, DHS, saying, we've provided this for you, we're giving you money, and you need to do what we say. And we can see right now Obama was trying to, using the Ferguson case, to try to nationalize the police force, give them federal funds, so everything then is reported back up to DHS, which reports to the executive branch. And all of this is being done for the collapse scenario. And we see they're introducing Jade Helm, which is going to go from July to September, which is in about 10, actually a little bit more than 10 states at this point, where they'll be training in taking away those people who are a threat to the authority of the government, capturing the governments in those states. And all of this is being done for when the economic collapse comes. It's not for terrorism. It makes no sense for terrorism, does it? And when in the world have you seen anything like this? as we've seen through time, everything is being ramped up. And it's continually being ramped up because as we get closer and closer and the central bankers can't hold the system together, they know they're going to have a major, major problem in this country. Not just this country, Canada, France, many of the European nations, Australia, UK. And this is why we saw the terrorism in these countries. Then the governments had the excuse to put more militarized enforcers on the ground, keep them there, change the laws, take away more of the people's rights, control them. All this is being done because they're getting prepared. We understand that the Patriot Act is coming up once again, and this is, I think it's June 1st, the deadline is, where they're going to vote on it, and it looks like Fight 215, they are a digital rights group in the United States, and they formed together to fight the Patriot Act from being passed once again. And we understand that since the Patriot Act, the NSA used this to spy on millions upon millions of Americans. They're watching everything we do. And we understand now that even before 9/11, they were recording the calls of the Americans, which is completely a violation of the Fourth Amendment. And the reason the group calls themselves Fight 215 is because it's Section 215, which allows them to go ahead and basically spy on the American people. And what's very interesting, the group is saying that we have not seen any evidence showing that the NSA Dragnet collection of Americans' phone records has produced any uniquely valuable intelligence. Senator Juan Wyden, one of the more vocal critics in Congress of the government surveillance programs, said that, yeah, we don't see anything. There's no proof that this actually works. They haven't stopped any terrorists. And we know why they haven't. Because the government is the terrorist organization that orchestrates, like the Boston bombing, Sandy Hook, 9/11, and everything that you see in other countries. Most of it is done, I would say 99.99% is done by the government and the central bankers to get the people doing what they want. Now, out in Ukraine, we understand the Kiev government, which was put into place by the United States government, is pushing war. They're trying to stall. They're trying to avoid abiding by the Minsk II agreement. And we understand that the United States, UK, and other nations are in there with advisors. They're bringing in weapons. And they are definitely getting ready for an offensive. And we have reports that some type of offensive might occur during the late spring or early summer of this year. And we see that the people in the Donbass region, 93% of the people in the rebel-held areas of Lugansk and Donetsk, saying that Kiev's transport and economic blockade of Donbass will only embitter people and alienate Donbass from Ukraine. And yeah, the blockade is still there. They won't let a lot of the supplies into that region. They're not following the Minsk agreement. And we see from the self-proclaimed Donetsk Republic, People's Republic, he is saying that Ukraine right now is basically hitting their websites, trying to block what's really going on so the people don't understand what's going on. And we have to remember, he did find, and their intelligence gathered, this document that said Kiev was going to bring in agent provocateurs into the region to try to destabilize that entire area. And he's saying that the sites come under attack with a DDoS attack, which basically disrupts their entire operation. And they're trying to convince people that they're not safe in these regions and they should go and feel safe with Kiev in this area. And we can see this is what the United States government and all the other nations try to do, like France, Spain, Italy, Canada, Australia, when there's a terror attack or they're trying to convince people that you need the government, they always let you know that you're not secure, you're not safe, and you need the government to protect them. We see in Ukraine that opponents of the Kiev regime, they're starting to disappear. A lot of the independent journalists in this region, they just disappear. 2 bloggers for the Voice of Odessa, they run a political site. They were seized by Security Bureau of Ukraine on April 7th, and their whereabouts are unknown at this time. And basically what's happening is there are other people who are just disappearing, or they are being killed. If they're opposing the Kiev government, they just disappear. And this is how they're handling this. And you have to remember, if they're doing it there under the control of the U.S. government, can you imagine if the U.S. government got rid of the rights of the people, the Constitution? They would do the same exact thing. And what makes everyone worried is this Jade Helm training going on. Because it seems like they're following and doing the same thing that they're doing in Ukraine at this time. But of course here, it's just a drill. There, it's live. Now we see that the U.S. military, they are definitely getting prepared for something. And we know they're getting prepared for the economic collapse, and we know they're getting for war. Because right now, it seems that they're moving back into Cheyenne Mountain, the base that is in Colorado. And it is designed to safeguard the command-sensitive sensors and servers from a potential electromagnetic pulse in an EMP. The Pentagon last week announced a $700 million contract with Raytheon Corporation to oversee the work for the North American Aerospace Command, NORAD. Admiral William Gortney, head of NORAD at Northern Command, said that because of this very nature of the way that Cheyenne Mountain is built, it's EMP hardened. So the question is, why at this point in time do they need to renovate everything, spend $700 million, and have everyone moved back into this location? What are they expecting? Why are they moving in at this point in time? Why are they telling Canada that we need to update our sensors in the Arctic because they're getting old? Now is the time to do it. We all know the reason. We all understand this. If you've been following the reports that I've been doing, we can see this is a complete buildup of the military taking special steps to protect the government officials. They're moving military assets through the Middle East, placing missile shields in South Korea, in Europe. They're encircling China. 60% of the fleet is moving to the Pacific. They're trying to move that base in Japan. Of course, the governor is blocking the United States. They want to move this to this area because it will allow them to bring in more advanced equipment. The government in Japan is trying to become go from a pacifist nation to a non-pacifist nation. They're building warships at this time. Russia, we see them building up their military. We see China doing the same thing, moving military assets into South America, into the countries where NATO is building up their forces. The U.S. is storing tanks in caves in Europe. This has been building up, and it's building up, and eventually, when everything's set and done, the U.S. government central bankers will provoke, or they will basically make it look like another country attacked the United States, Europe, to make it look like they threw the first punch. Could be a group, could be a country, and this is why we need to go to war. And you can see they're preparing for this. It's right in front of our eyes. I mean, if it wasn't in my reports going back, almost 2 years now, we would say, oh, look, they're removing all the military assets from Europe. The missile shield came down. oh, they're not really doing the pivot to Asia. They're not bringing the fleet there. They're recalling them all home. But actually, we're seeing the opposite right now. And this is how we know they're getting ready. And this last move to go into Cheyenne Mountain to protect themselves from an E&P, it seems like they're getting prepared and ready for something very, very big. And we know what that is because the central bankers are ready to use nuclear weapons if they need to do it, and they're going to make sure that they're protected. Of course, the U.S. government, those officials, they understand what's happening. They're going to protect themselves. Now, we understand in Iran, with the P5+1 talks, they've come up with a framework, and we see the leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, says it is the very specifics of the nuclear negotiations between Iran and 6 world powers that would determine the fate of the talks. Everything lies in the details, said the leader. The other side, which is known for backpedaling, he's talking about the United States, on its commitments, may want to corner our country when it comes to the specifics of the negotiation. And Iran is very concerned because the United States is putting a spin on the results of the negotiation. The U.S. put out a fact sheet that the Iranian foreign minister said was in some instances twisted a little bit. It twisted the facts. On some occasions in the fact sheet, we see dishonest claims being made by the U.S. State Department. Well, they're doing this on purpose. Because if they make these fake claims to the public right now, they can always go back and say, listen, Iran didn't follow the deal. Remember when we talked about it? And we told you what the fact sheet said, even though they changed it for the American people, they can go back on the deal very, very easily. And we've seen this done before. And again, we have to remember, Iran wants the sanctions dropped as soon as they make the deal. Because they're worried if the U.S. decides, no, we're not going to drop it, we're going to phase it out, they will never, ever phase out the sanctions. And we can see at this point in time that they won't. And if Iran doesn't give up control of their central bank and sell their natural resources using the U.S. dollar, this deal is toast. Right now they worked out the framework, and we'll have to see when it comes to the last part of the agreement, and that is happening on July 1st. Now, we understand out in Yemen, Saudi Arabia, they are still bombing. They let some Red Cross planes into the area, but we see that basically they're still blocking the full aid to the Yemeni people. And again, Saudi Arabia said, when the time is right, we will let the aid in, and they're not letting all of it in at this time. A U.S. official confirmed that it is adding more U.S. military personnel to help coordinate the terror campaign from Saudi Arabia. We understand that there's 2 more the aircraft carriers, the Theodore Roosevelt and the Vinson. We also understand there's assault amphibious ships right off the coast of Yemen. Iran has a destroyer and another ship right off the coast of Yemen. And we can see that this whole thing is starting to heat up at this point in time. And it appears with all the bombing that Saudi Arabia is doing right now, the Houthi rebels have made gains. They overran Atak, the capital of the oil-rich southeastern province. And we can see right now they have captured the $500 million worth of weapons that the U.S. kind of misplaced. And it seems like that they have the weapons. And what's very interesting is that the Yemeni people, the Houthis, they didn't want the United States government central bankers meddling in their country. They didn't want the central banking system in their country. And we can see that now the Houthi people, they are in the vicinity of the central bank of Yemen, and residents saw a dozen bodies strewn on the streets and said several buildings were burnt or demolished by rocket fire. And they say that they've seen the Houthi near the central bank. They have blowtorches, axes, and it looks like they're ready to go and maybe steal some money from the central bank. And we've seen this before in other Middle Eastern countries where they break into the central bank. We saw this in Libya. They did the same thing. Actually, I believe Iraq, the same thing did occur. And we can see that the United States government central bankers are doing whatever they possibly can to stop this. They want the Houthis to surrender. Because you have to remember, all this air bombardment, the bombings inside Yemen, is not going to work unless they bring ground troops in, because they're going to have to maintain control. If the Houthis surrender, they don't need the ground troops. But at this point, they're not surrendering. And this is why we see Saudi Arabia, the U.S., Pakistan, Egypt, getting ready for a major ground invasion. And of course, we had an indication from an Egyptian anonymous source that they are preparing for some type of ground invasion. And we can see that the United States government central bankers cannot bring the troops into this region because they don't have the authorization to do this. If they had the authorization for war passed, then yes, they can go into these countries because they just have to say the Islamic State is in there or Al-Qaeda. And we have to remember, Al-Qaeda is used in two different ways. Al-Qaeda are those people who want the U.S. government out of their country. They call them Al-Qaeda. This way they can use the drones on them. They call them terrorists. Just like in Ukraine, those people who are against the puppet regime, they're terrorists. Al-Qaeda is also a CIA-backed proxy army, which they use for whatever they need it for. And right now, it looks like they're using the CIA-backed Al-Qaeda proxy army to get the Houthi leaders. They're offering 20 kilograms of gold if they can basically capture the leaders of the Houthis. So right now, it seems like Al-Qaeda, which is controlled by the CIA, U.S. government, central bankers, they are using this and going around inside Yemen saying, listen, we're gonna give you gold if you can capture the leaders. And they're doing whatever they possibly can to get the Houthis out of the country and restore the puppet regime inside Yemen. And of course, they're saying that it's completely different than what's happening in Ukraine. But it's really the same thing. The only difference is the United States government central bankers was behind the people in Ukraine because they wanted to install a puppet regime. In Yemen, there was a puppet regime, and they don't want the people to throw their puppet regime out. That's it. We see Sweden is going to send troops to Iraq as part of their Islamic State coalition. They intend to deploy troops to northern Iraq as part of the U.S.-led anti-Islamic State coalition to train and advise security forces in the region. The government proposes that it will give the Swedish Parliament will give approval to send an armed group of about 35 people this year to participate in the military training conducted by the International Coalition against the Islamic State. Sweden is ready to increase the number of troops from up to 120 if necessary. And we can see that these countries are bringing in more advisors and trainers, and of course they're ready to do battle if they're needed. And all of this eventually is going to lead to the invasion of Syria. Remember, the goal of the United States government central bankers has not changed. They want the natural resources in Syria. Qatar wants to put a pipeline that goes right through Syria. They want to use the US dollar on their oil. The same thing with Iran. And if they can't figure out a way of doing this, they just change their tactics, but their goal is the same. Just like with Iran, if they cannot get this framework completed and have them put their resources on the US dollar, all they will do is they will cancel this agreement. They will not go along with it, and they will invade instead. That's it. And we can see right now they're still bringing up the chlorine gas inside Syria. They're still trying to push this. And we know it is the Islamic State, the proxy army of the United States government central bankers. They are the ones who are using the chlorine gas, just like the Free Syrian Army used the sarin gas back in August of 2013. Now, very interestingly, the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation is urging WordPress users to patch plugins for the popular content management system following a increase of the Islamic State attacking websites and changing the websites to say, you've been attacked by the Islamic State. Now, the FBI has given a lot of great recommendations. They haven't. They're saying that you should keep your plugins up to date and make sure that everything that's working on your WordPress site is completely up to date. Now, if they were very concerned about the Islamic State hacking into a WordPress site, they would have given real information. But you notice they don't. They just tell people, your plugins basically a plugin is some type of it's almost like an application that you can put into the WordPress site to have it do maybe some type of function, maybe have a poll on your site or to add pictures to your site. They didn't give real information maybe you should install a firewall to block those IP addresses. And the Islamic State is not cyber attacking these sites. This is the government. Why would they attack WordPress sites? It makes no sense whatsoever unless they're going after the alternative media, because a lot of the alternative media use WordPress because it's very easy to install and use. And if they were concerned about this, they would have told everyone to basically install a firewall to block SQL injections, which allow them to add a user and go through the back door and change things. They would tell them to, from your hosting standpoint, block those IP addresses that are trying to attack. I mean, basically on my site for X22Report.com, there I get about 40 to 50 attacks a day. And basically, I continually block all of these IP addresses. And most of the attacks are SQL injections, trying to take over the site. And if the FBI was so concerned, they would have given real information about this, but they're not giving information because they want this to continually happen. And I just want to say that from everything that we've been watching and everything that we've been talking about, it seems that as we approach this spring and summer, the U.S. government central bankers are definitely getting ready to push their agenda forward. And this agenda is basically covering up the economic collapse and pushing war. And we've seen this in the last 2 years. Usually it happens maybe sometime in the spring, definitely in the August time period, especially when Congress leaves for their summer vacation. And we have to remember, every single time something came up, Putin stepped in and stopped what was going on. Will he be able to do it this time? I don't know, because I think the U.S. government central bankers have been watching the situation because they're creating the situation, and they realize that we're running out of time here. The illusionary numbers that we have right now to show that the economy is improving, they're not making sense anymore. And we need to bring on an event to push what is going on here. And with this push to get NORAD up and running in Cheyenne Mountain, this tells us something, that we are getting very close. And I do believe that they're going to hit us with some type of cyber attack. There will be physical attacks here in the United States because they need to get the people on board to going to war. And I've said this many times, and I noticed they've been pushing Russia, cyber attacking, China, cyber attacking, the Islamic State, cyber attacking, and they eventually will detonate something physically in multiple cities. They will bring down the power in certain areas. They will hit the banks. And this might occur from July to September as the jade helm drills occur, because it would work out to their benefit if they went ahead and did this. Because what they can do at this time is have a couple attacks, bring the banking systems down. Those elite forces from Jade Helm would already be in all of these states. Think about this for a second. They would give them the green light because the collapse is occurring and we need to maintain control. They can freeze the banks, put them in a bank holiday. You will not be able to access the bank at this time. And they will have the forces already deployed. They've done this many times before. And they will convince the people it was Russia, it was China, it was the Islamic State, and we were in a recovery. How dare they do this? The Fed most likely will step in and say, listen, we'll start creating money like crazy, which will devalue the dollar. Of course, it would all go to the banks because they'll get the bail-ins and the newly created money. And we can see at this point in time, they'll eventually declare martial law. And this is why we all, as a people, need to be prepared, first of all. Second of all, we need to call them on this. Not just 10 people, not just 1,000 people. Millions of people will need to come out and say, no, we are not going along with this. We know what you've done. We don't believe you. We need absolute proof of what is going on here. And you know they will not be able to produce it because it was an inside job, just like they can't produce anything else. And this is why everyone needs to be prepared for anything that should occur. If the lights go out because there's an EMP strike, you need to be prepared. If it's a cyber attack and the lights go out, you need to be prepared. If the banks are shut down, you need to have cash on hand. You need to have gold and silver. If you can't get to the market because everything's collapsing, people are going crazy, they're storming the markets, you need to have food. You need to have medical supplies. You need to have medicine. I've said this many times before, and Putin stepped in. Do I think he's going to step in this time? I think it's going to get out of control this time. I think they're going to push it as hard as they possibly can. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.